Hello and welcome to Cheetah TV. My name's Brian Badger from the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Now, regular viewers will know that this series of videos is designed to give you a bit of an insight into some of the projects and the initiatives and frontline conservation that's undertaken by the Cheetah Conservation Fund, both in Namibia and around the world. Now, this week we're going to be dealing with the rescue, the rehabilitation and the release of cheetahs in Namibia. And I was joined by Eli Walker, who's the curator for CCF in Namibia, and give us some of his insights into some of the projects that have been going on and are going on right as we speak. Now, don't forget, for more information or to make a donation or to sponsor one of our cheetahs or livestock guardian dogs, you can visit our website at cheetah.org. Before you leave, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. It really does help us grow. In the meantime, let's hop across to Namibia and speak to Eli. So, hi Eli, long time no see. How are you doing?
Good, Brian. It's good to see you. It has been some time for sure.
Yeah, it is. Why don't you share with people, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Eli Walker. I'm originally from Georgia in the southeast of the United States. I've been working with CCF on and off since 2011. I started as a student here and then came back full time. Currently here at CCF, I'm the curator. So I help oversee the captive wildlife that we have here on site. And I also handle all of the data management that we have coming in across the organization. So we are a research facility. So we do have an extremely wide diversity of data coming in from all departments across the organization. And I help make sure that that data is being captured and stored appropriately so that it can be accessed later for any of the purposes that we might need.
Well, I'm sure that's a task and a half, because CCF, I know, is very, very data heavy. We rely so much on data, and some of this data stretches back to, the founding of CCF. So that's a huge task. I know that the question on everybody else's lips is that how are the cheetahs, the resident cheetahs, doing right at this moment?
They're all doing pretty well. I think everyone's quite happy. We've got 4 young cats at the moment. We have one relatively new arrival who is actually currently right now as we speak being mixed in with 3 of the other young cheetahs. So that's always nice. Themselves, particularly when they're young. It's really important that they have social contact. So as soon as we're able to get these young orphans in with other cats of similar age, we try and do that as quickly as possible so that they're not alone. When they're by themselves, when they first come in, it does take quite some time to get them integrated in with one of the appropriate groups, but it is a slow process. One, because we have to make sure that the cats know each other and that they aren't going to injure each other. But also when it comes to managing these animals, they're coming from the wild. So when these young orphans are being ripped from the wild and then thrown into an entirely new circumstance, an entirely new situation, it's very scary. It's very stressful for them. And just for day-to-day management of these individuals, we have to be very sensitive. But it's obviously they're dependent on us. But anytime we go around them, they are obviously very scared and freak out. So we have to slowly integrate them into the daily routine here at CCF. So we've had this little guy for I think just over a month now, and he's calmed down, he's chilled out a bit, and now he's starting to go in slowly with some of these younger cats as well. We do have some older cats. We're starting to get into another wave of older cheetahs. So we have some health issues that we're managing as we go along as well. Obviously, in the wild, cheetahs, their average lifespan is only about 8 to 10 years. So the general old age issues that you see with cats in captivity is not something that the cheetahs generally deal with in the wild, but they do have all the same problems as normal cats, which primarily is renal failure, right? Renal failure is such a big problem across, I think, most cats. You know better than me, Brian. You've worked with more cats than I have, but as our cats start getting older, they need some additional support. So we have our cats quite well trained for medical management, so we can give them the therapy that they need. But beyond that, all of our cats are doing well. Really happy. We obviously don't have any tourists, so they've had a long break from anyone looking at them too much, other than us caring for them on a day-to-day basis.
There's lots of misconceptions about the rescue type side. You know, you say you're getting cubs in, and the reality is that it's a very complicated process. You know, in an ideal world, every cat that came in would be at CCF for an hour and then be released back out into the wild. But you know, and I know very well that's really not possible. So when a young cat comes in, you just mentioned the little guy that's kind of settling in at the moment. Sometimes it's very early that you know that it hasn't got that skill set to be able to be released. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, that's right. You know, we're humans, and we are very, very bad cheetah teachers, right? You know, there's not much that we can do as people to teach a cheetah how to be a wild cheetah. So as much as we like, or as much as we would want to, you know, or as much as we can, we want to put as many of these animals back into the wild. But sadly, you know, the reality of the matter is that when we have these young orphans come in, a lot of times permanent captivity is the only option for these cats, particularly within within the landscapes that we have available to release these animals, right? So there's so many factors that go into it. You know, one, like you said, is the time that they have in the wild with their mother. You know, their mother is the only one that can really teach them how to be a wild cheetah, right? There's nothing that we can do to teach them. So if they're deprived of the experience learning from her in the wild, then, you know, it could rule out, you know, their chances for release. Another big thing, and we actually have a paper coming out soon, hopefully on all of this, you know, our entire rehabilitation and release process, that will, you know, really go into a little bit more detail on some of these components. But one big thing is their habituation level to people, right? We as humans are the biggest threat to the cheetah. So taking cheetahs that are extremely comfortable with people and releasing them back into the wild is not always an option, you know, particularly when you don't have a protected area that cheetah can't escape from, where they, you know, like a private game reserve, for example. We work with Arindi a lot, for example, you know, but these reserves, they can only take so many cheetahs, and a habituated cheetah might not have a problem in a reserve like Arindi, but if we want to release a cheetah outside of a reserve like that into, you know, the area where most of the cheetahs in Africa live, you know, like 90% of cheetahs in Africa live outside of these protected areas. If we want to release a cheetah back into one, you know, into this, you know, this area outside of the fence per se, you know, that cheetah must not be comfortable with people. You know, if they're super comfortable with people, the first thing they're going to do is go to a farm and start begging for food, or start eating livestock, and that's when that animal would be killed. So, you know, learning how to be a wild cheetah is one component, but their comfort with people is another. Like I said before, you know, when these young orphans come into captivity, we have to take care of them as people. You know, they need our attention, they need our support, and them becoming habituated to us is just one of the things that happens as a result. We obviously have a lot of techniques that we can use to try and mitigate their habituation level if we think that an orphan has a chance for release. And that's one of the most important components of our rehabilitation and release program, is actually mitigating their habituation level during their time here in captivity. But if they're a really young baby that needs to be bottle fed, for example, you know, there's really not much chance for that sort of individual to go back into the wild, you know, particularly within, you know, the Namibian landscape here.
So when a cheetah does come in, just to make it more understandable for everybody, you know, when it comes in, CCF's land is very big. You know, sure. It covers over 200 square miles. So when a cat comes in that is not the baby, the stereotypical baby, bottle fed and all that, and the initial assessment is that there's a possibility for release, the cats can come in and pretty much stay away from people. So you can halt that that habituation that you mentioned, because I mean some of the for want of a better word, enclosures, because they cover, you know, hectares upon hectares. I mean, some of them are maybe, you know, a 40-minute drive away from the center, and so therefore away from tourists and stuff like that. So that's another option as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, when we have a cheetah come in, you know, we have a pretty big decision to make, right? Is this a cat that has a chance to be released into the wild? Or does it seem like this is an animal that's going to need a little bit more closer contact by, or closer care by us as their caretakers? Generally, that's an entirely age-dependent sort of decision to be made. It's really hard to put a number around it, but when we are describing it to the, you know, to our visitors, for example, generally what we're saying is 6 months or younger, there's very little chance for that animal to go back into the wild. 6 months or older, perhaps they do have a chance for release one day. I think we're pushing the bounds on that, and we've gotten it down to probably more like 4 months, 4 to 5 months or older, and they have a chance for release. So once we've made the decision as to whether or not they're release candidates or not, that's how we can kind of decide on how we manage and how we care for that individual going forward. Obviously, a 4, 5, 6 month old cub cannot be released right away, right? Let's make that clear from the very beginning. You know, we can't take a dependent individual and release it back into the wild right away. You know, these animals are going to be spending at least 2 years with us here at CCF in captivity before they're old enough, big enough, strong enough to go back into the wild. But if we do have a release candidate, exactly like you say, we're able to house them in enclosures here at our headquarters in Namibia that are far away from the day-to-day operation of CCF. So that the only contact that they're seeing, or the only human activity that they're seeing on a regular basis, is us taking care of them. You know, where the daily husbandry routine is the only time that they really ever have human contact. And even during the husbandry routine, you know, we are limiting our time with that individual. You know, we don't want to go, we don't want to spend any extra time necessary to make sure that that animal is healthy and happy and doing okay. Whereas, you know, for the cats that we are going to be having, you know, permanently here in captivity, we'll do all of the normal, you know, husbandry training and, you know, medical sort of behaviors that we want to see, and, you know, any sort of management sort of behavior that we need from you. That. Because we know that it's, you know, the habituation level is not an issue for that individual because release isn't on the table for that animal. But for these cats that are, you know, potentially going back into the wild, we do keep our contact with them to a minimum, and we keep them in an enclosure that is plenty far away from the center. That way, the only contact and the only human activity they are seeing is us taking care of them on a day-to-day basis. And again, that is pretty much how we are mitigating their habituation level. Another really important component, and perhaps you were going to get to this, I can either leave it for now or for later, but, you know, is the post-release monitoring that we do with our cheetahs going back into the wild. This is the most critical phase of our release program, because all of these individuals, they've been, again, ripped from the wild, right? So they were, one, deprived of the time that they had in the wild with their mother and all of the experiences and learning that would have come with that. This is not only how to hunt. Like, hunting is a relatively instinctual thing. You think about a house cat at home, right? You don't need to teach your house cat how to hunt. It's the most efficient killing machine on the planet, a house cat, right? You know, you don't need to do anything. They just know instinctually. A cheetah, you know, they have a much narrower selection of prey available, right? Whereas a house cat can hunt all the birds that are available, all the rodents that are available, all of the lizards, reptiles, and everything. A cheetah is a much larger animal, and therefore its prey selection is much more narrow. They have a very much narrower selection of food items to choose from. So their hunting strategy has to be extremely refined and well tuned to those, you know, to these antelope that they're hunting. So it's a little bit more difficult for them to learn how to hunt. But the hunting is, it's really instinctual. And I believe at least that if you provide any cheetah enough time in the right environment, they will learn on their own how to hunt. One of the biggest problems, though, is what predators to avoid, right? You have these animals growing up in captivity. They don't have exposure to leopards, or they don't have exposure to hyenas or lions, for example. And these are all animals that perhaps they could come into contact with once they are out into the wild. But if they've never seen them and they've never seen their mother respond to these animals, how do they know what to do when they come across them? Again, it's quite instinctual, but there is a lot of evidence to show that these captive raised animals are naive to some of these predators. So there's quite a few factors that we have to think about, and our post-release monitoring of these individuals for the early days in their release, right after they've been released, is absolutely vital. Our role during this time is to provide as safe an environment as possible for this cheetah that has grown up in captivity, to learn on their own how to be wild, to have these experiences, to build up enough experience and knowledge of living in the wild that we are confident they're going to have a good chance of surviving on their own. And to do this really intense post-release monitoring, we need a cheetah that is relatively comfortable with us, right? So this habituation level that we're talking about being a big problem, we can also go to the other extreme and them be way too uncomfortable with people that we won't ever see them again. Because if we can't see them, we can't be there to provide them support along the way. So it's a matter of balancing their habituation levels during their time here in captivity, so that one, they're not too comfortable with people, so that they're just going to go to the first human that they see and be like, "Hey, where's my food?" And it's also, not to the point to where we can't ever see them once we release them back into the wild. If that makes sense. Really long explanation for it, but it's quite it's a very important thing to understand. The balance and all of the factors that go into releasing these animals back into the wild. It would be great if we could just take every individual and put it back into the wild, but we're just going to end up with a whole bunch of dead cats that way.
Yeah, no. That makes perfect sense. And every case, well, pretty much every case is going to be different. And
exactly. So different
and stuff. So you have to use yours and the team's knowledge and best guess scenario a lot of the time, so people understand when a cheetah is released into the wild, the range of a cheetah is absolutely huge. So the monitoring can have its own problems as well. So the use of technology. And as the technology has improved and become more efficient, how much do you rely on technology to do monitoring and stuff like that?
100%. Like without tracking collars, we would not be able to do the rehab and release work that we do. I mean, we could release animals into the wild, but with these cats, like you say, they can walk. In the first few days of their release, they can walk 100 kilometers if they want to, right? So if we don't have the ability to actually follow that animal wherever they go, then there's nothing that we can do to support them along the way. And again, our post-release monitoring is the biggest thing that sets our release efforts apart from many of the other release efforts throughout history that have tried to take captive raised individuals and put them back into the wild. Following the animal and giving them the support along the way is critical. That's what keeps our survival probability at the level that we want it to be, which is obviously as high as possible. So the GPS collars and the VHF radio collars that we use are absolutely essential to the rehabilitation and release work that we do. Without them, again, we would not be able to do it in the way that we do. So these collars allow us to find the animal on a regular basis, even if it's not a visual sighting, even if it's not with the classic, wildlife documentary, antenna, wildlife biologist guy tracking the animal on the ground, even if it's just following the animal through the GPS data that's coming down from their collar. it's really, really essential for us to be able to monitor how they're doing. And if you spend enough time looking at dots on a map, the GPS points that are coming from the collar, you can really start to learn what that individual or what that animal is up to, right? So I've watched so many cheetahs, and I've tracked them, and I've seen them in the wild, and I've looked at their GPS data, that I can actually just look at the movement data and have a relatively good understanding as to what, or a good guess as to what, a very educated guess as to what that cheetah might be up to. So whether or not it's resting, whether or not it's made a kill, whether or not it's struggling to make a kill, whether or not it's in a dangerous situation or even in a trap cage, for example, whether that individual has given birth, whether or not that individual is injured, for example. All of these things, with this technology that we have available today, we're able to see all of this. And it's really, again, it's enabled a lot of the progress that we've made in the recent decade or so in terms of our rehabilitation and release program. We have the ability to understand our animals and what they're up to in such fine resolution, particularly relative to decades ago, when this sort of effort might have first started, that we've really been able to adjust and inform our management to maximize our success. And again, maximizing success in this work is making sure our animals live for as long as possible and survive out in the wild. And technology is absolutely essential. The tracking collars, the collars that we deploy on the cheetahs, are absolutely critical. I would not be comfortable taking a captive raised cheetah and putting it back into the wild without a collar on, because I have no idea what's going on with that individual. And there's a lot of philosophical debate to be had around that. But yeah, the technology is absolutely essential.
I mean, you mentioned how the progress of technology and CCF keeping up with that progress as well. And you mentioned kind of decades of this type of work being tried successfully in the past. But just to explain to people, I mean, originally back in the day, back in the olden days, it was, a tracking collar was basically like a dog collar with a plate, with a brass plate with a number on it. That you could identify would be with a pair of binoculars. And that has so many pitfalls to it. Obviously, with one is the distance that a cheetah travels, talking about hundreds of kilometers, and they don't follow roads. They can go straight across the bush. And in Namibia alone, just to explain, I mean, it's the size of Texas, 2.5 times size of the UK. You talk about huge areas, but also I feel that one of the benefits of the satellite collars that we're using now, there's lots of pluses towards them, but also that it can be totally non-invasive, and that's not just for the cheetah. That's for everything else, because we know that we're looking at conservation on a holistic platform. So, you have to be mindful that you're not traipsing across, for want of a better phrase, virgin bush and disturbing everything else on its path. I'm sure in another 2, 3, 5 years, then technology will move again. But when you were saying about reading the data, it's like a language on its own. People like yourself that live by their data. When especially during the first stages of release. So can you just explain how, even over the last 5 years, how the collars have developed, so it kind of makes it better for you as the researcher, and also better for the cat?
Absolutely, yes. So one of the biggest things, particularly within recent history, is the price, right? So this technology is not cheap. These GPS collars, they communicate with the satellite networks, and anytime you're like a handheld GPS or your phone is just triangulating its position based on the satellite positions. It's not actually communicating data through the satellite, right? So the cheetah collars, right, they obviously do the same thing to collect their location, But these animals are, who knows where they, I mean, again, they could walk a few hundred kilometers in a few weeks if they wanted to. So if we don't have the ability to actually receive that data, then it's pointless. So these collars, they have to actually transmit their data through a satellite network. And the technology that goes into doing this is not cheap. And we also have to pay data fees, for example. We have to actually pay for a phone, just like your phone bill. We have to do the same thing for the collars, because they are sending data through the satellite network. And there's only so many satellites up there, and they're always going to charge you for transmitting data through, even if it's small, tiny bytes of data. I mean, it's just it's very, very small text string of data that's coming through, but we are charged for that. So over the recent history, the price point has come down as any new technology is further and further developed. Price generally is always an issue, is always a factor that is addressed. And the developers of this tech is always trying to make it more competitive or more accessible to as many people. So we've seen a reduction in pricing, of course, but then also the size, like you said, for the animal itself, the size of these collars is decreasing as well. Then we're able to pack the same tech into a smaller space, and that's obviously good as well. It's probably a good time to discuss the fact that the collars don't cause the cheetahs any problem at all. They're not dangerous to the cheetahs. They're not damaging them in any way. We get the question a lot, like, how does it mess with the cheetah? How does it affect their hunting success? And as long as we are following the standard protocols in terms of how you collar the animal, like actually how it goes on the animal, how tight it is or how loose it is, and the weight requirements. You can only put a collar that is so heavy on an animal of a certain size. As long as we are following these recommendations and these protocols, we don't cause the individual animal any problem whatsoever. These collars in some form have been used for decades. So we're very good at ensuring that anytime we are collaring an animal, it's done responsibly and it's not going to cause the cheetah a problem. But of course, if the technology can cater to it, we would love to make them as small as possible and as light as possible. And that is another thing that we're starting to see as well. Another big thing, and a huge thing actually, is battery life. Battery life is huge, and it's one of the biggest limitations to this technology as well. Generally, most tracking collars with the data frequency that we use are lasting us around 2 years currently. And this is a number that is expanding and is growing and growing and growing as we go along. The batteries are lasting longer, the technology functions more efficiently, so they're using less power, so on and so forth. And maximizing battery life is extremely beneficial for a few reasons. One, we are able to maximize the amount of data we're collecting off the cheetah. We're able to collect more fine scale data on the cheetah. So these collars are programmable. We can tell the collar how often to collect a GPS point. So every 15 minutes to once a day is a possibility. Obviously, once a day is a little bit less useful for our purposes. And for the first month of release, we always have our collars set to at least 1 point every hour. But it comes with a battery cost, right? So it's always balancing your use case with the battery life. Particularly with our rehabilitated and released cats, we do like to keep them collared for as long as we possibly can. So we do make every effort to capture that animal again and put a new collar on it when the battery is depleted. Because these animals are coming from a very unique situation, the work that we're doing is very unique and very new. We do want to continue to collect information on these animals throughout their lives, because again, that helps us inform how we make management decisions in the future. It helps us refine our process. It helps us understand these animals better. It helps us understand the problems that they run into, what we can do to help them better, what we can do to maximize their survival. So collecting this data is very important. So a longer battery life means we have to capture that animal fewer times throughout its life, and that's, from an animal welfare perspective, very important to us. We obviously do want to minimize the number of times we're needing to capture animals back from the wild. But for some cheetahs, once we release them, we don't ever have a hope of catching them again, because who knows what's going to happen to them, where they're going to go. Perhaps they're in an area that's completely inaccessible to us. There are legal things that we have to consider. We're not allowed to go anywhere we want in the country, right? So there's all sorts of things that we have to consider. And as the technology improves, it just makes everything better all around.
That's a great point, because some people may think that, well, you've done all this before. You've tracked cheetahs. Surely you know everything that there is to know. But
if only.
Saw you laughing there, but bear with me. But this year is a perfect example where, in the extreme, I should say, where things change, the rest of the environment changes. You've got climate change, you've got political change, you've got everything that changes. And by having all that data, so by pursuing that knowledge all the time, it gives us so many scenarios to look back on, and enables us to make better decisions. In not just Namibia, but obviously we share our data with all the range countries as well. One point that about the collars, and you're saying that not every cat that gets released is going to be captured again. So the collar doesn't stay on the cat for the rest of its life. That often worries some people, where you put this collar on, you release it, the battery runs up, and cheetah. So just tell us quickly about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So back to the habituation, story in the past. Even within our release candidates, the habituation levels of these animals varies as well, right? So we have cats that are more so habituated, and less so habituated. And we do realize, and we recognize the fact that even though we're probably going to be able to see that animal in the wild, that we're going to be able to track it to some extent, even if it's just through the GPS data, the chances are we're never going to catch that animal again, right? It's just not going to happen. Like, that animal's never going to let us catch them again, So anytime we have an animal like this, we're always using a collar that has a device on it called a timed release drop-off. And this is basically a big switch in the collar. And after a set period, it just opens and the collar falls right off the animal. That way, as you say, we know that animal doesn't have to spend the rest of its life with the collar on, which is...
Well, Eli, I know how busy you are, and I'm sure you want to get back to your data, if not your dinner.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for finding the time and talking to us and enlightening us on your side of the operation, and we know how key it is. So thank you very much for everything that you do, and hopefully we'll meet again very, very soon. So Eli, thanks very much.
Not a problem. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad I had the opportunity to talk. It seems like it was such a great, despite coronavirus and everything, what a great venue to chat through. This is cool for sure.
Great. Thanks, Eli.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
If you want to learn more about that project or any of the projects that CCF are involved with, both in Namibia and around the world, and also to make a donation or to sponsor a livestock guardian dog or a resident cheetah, please visit our website at cheetah.org. Now, if you liked the video, please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel. And you can also set the reminder for further episodes on Cheetah TV. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you again next time.